Hi everyone, welcome to part 7 on GPAI, General Purpose AI Systems and Models.
In this part, we explain how the AI Act regulates powerful general-purpose models at the model layer, how systemic risks changes the obligations, and why downstream providers still carry their own duties for the final AI system they place on the market or use.
Look at the big picture. GPAI models sit in Chapter 5 of the AI Act. The Act deliberately splits responsibilities between two layers.
First, the GPAI model provider layer. Obligations that attach to the model itself, mainly in Article 53, and additional obligations in Article 55, if the model is considered systemic risk.
Second, the downstream layer. Providers and deployers who integrate a model into a product or service still have to classify the concrete use case and comply with the relevant system-side requirements across the AI Act, including transparency duties and the high-risk regime when applicable.
The mental model is layered compliance. Model obligations support downstream compliance, but they don't replace it.
The term systemic risk is defined in the AI Act, and it's the hinge concept for stricter model governance.
Systemic risk is tied to the high impact capabilities of GPAI models, where the impact is significant because of the reach or reasonably foreseeable negative effects, and because those effects can propagate at scale across the value chain.
That is why the law treats certain GPAI models as infrastructure-like. Harms or failures don't stay inside one app, for example, they can replicate across many downstream services that reuse the same model.
Here's the logic of who owns what. A GPAI model provider has to comply for the model, produce documentation, provide instructions and information for downstream actors, and cooperate with oversight. If the model is systemic risk, add the extra Article 55 duties.
But the downstream provider or deployer is responsible for the AI system they build or use. They still need to ask what is the system doing, in which domain for which decisions, and with what risks. That determines whether high-risk obligations, transparency duties, or other requirements apply. Let's make Article 53 more concrete. The first baseline duty is technical documentation. The provider must draw up and keep up-to-date documentation for the model, including how it was trained and tested and the results of evaluations, and keep it available for oversight.
The second duty is downstream enablement. The provider must provide information and instructions to downstream providers so they can integrate and use the model in a compliant way. Operationally, this is where model documentation emerges. Intended uses, known limitations, performance characteristics, risk mitigation, and integration guidance.
The third duty is cooperation. Providers have information duties and must cooperate with competent authorities and the AI Office when they make reasoned requests. The AI Act is designed so oversight is not optional or purely voluntary.
Article 53 also includes a requirement that is easy to miss, but very consequential. A written operational policy describing how the provider ensures training and the use of training data respects EU copyright law.
In practice, that means the provider needs internal governance that is documentable and repeatable. For example, how training data is sourced, how copyrighted material is handled, how text and data mining, opt and outs are respected where relevant, and how legal risks are identified, escalated, and addressed. Another obligation in Article 53 is the requirement to publish a sufficiently detailed public summary of the training data content.
This does not mean publishing the dataset nor listing every file or URL. The idea is transparency at the level of meaningful categories. What kinds of content and sources were used at a high level so the public and regulation can understand what the model was trained on without focusing on disclosure and protected details.
The AI Act also anticipates standardization here. The Commission can provide a mandatory template, which matters because templates create comparability across providers and reduce the incentive to publish vague, non-comparable summaries. Hopefully.
Now we move to the special risk category, GPAI models with systemic risk. Once a model falls into this category, the provider has additional obligations beyond the baseline Article 53 duties. Systemic risk is defined as a risk that is specific to the high-impact capabilities of general-purpose AI models, having a significant impact on the union market due to their reach or due to actual or reasonably foreseeable negative effects on public health, safety, public security, fundamental rights, or the society as a whole. That can be propagated at scale across the value chain.
Article 51 sets the logic for when a GPAI model counts as systemic risk. The core idea is capability and scale. A model becomes a systemic risk model when it reaches a high-impact capability threshold assessed through appropriate tools, methodologies, indicators, and benchmarks.
The practical point is that the systemic risk is not about one specific downstream use case. It's about the model's general capability profile and its potential to create large-scale effects across many deployments.
The AI Act also provides a designation pathway. Even if classification is contested or uncertain, the Commission may designate a model as a systemic risk. This is a powerful opportunity for the regulator.
Annex 13 points to technical and impact-relevant indicators that help reason about high-impact capabilities, including factors linked to scale and potential reach. This gives the Commission a way to make systemic risk determinations more consistent and evidence-based, rather than purely discretionary. Once a model is systemic risk, Article 55 adds obligations.
First, robust model evaluation. Providers must evaluate the model using state-of-the-art tools and standardized or appropriate protocols, and include adversarial testing where relevant. In practice, that means red teaming, capability design, and safety evaluation designed to surface failure modes that scale.
Second, systemic risk management. Providers must identify, assess, and mitigate systemic risks with state-of-the-art methods and treat this as an ongoing lifecycle duty, not a one-off compliance deliverable.
Third, incident and security obligations. Providers must report serious incidents and implement cybersecurity measures to protect the model and its supply chain against misuse, theft, compromise, and AI-specific attacks.
Many of the Article 55 concepts are openly formulated. State-of-the-art, involving benchmarks and fast-moving capability assessments create compliance uncertainty.
The AI Act tries to address that gap through implementing instruments, including a GPAI Code of Practice, as a practical route for demonstrating compliance. The idea is mapping. Transparency and copyright practices align with Article 53, and safety and security practices align with Article 55 for systemic risk models.
For providers, the benefit is predictability. For regulators, the benefit is comparability and a clearer evidentiary baseline for oversight.
Even if the upstream model provider is fully compliant with Article 53 and, where relevant, Article 55, downstream providers still have to comply with the system-side requirements for their product.
If the downstream product is an AI system within scope, the downstream actor must apply the risk-based logic, classify the use case, determine whether it is high risk, and implement the relevant controls.
Transparency duties can also apply in certain contexts, especially where users interact with AI or encounter synthetic or manipulated content. The point is that model compliance is not end-to-end product compliance.
Finally, implementation and oversight. The AI Act is a single EU-wide framework, but operationalization happens through governance instruments, oversight by the AI Office and national authorities, plus tools like codes of practice, templates, and guidelines that translate legal obligations into auditable practices.
Thank you for watching and see you in the next part of the course.